Maybe it's the superintendent, you know, just isn't as trained. We all started somewhere. I remember the first home I built. I felt like I was putting a washing machine and turned on high speed. There's a process that all of us go through, so we need to make sure that we're training our people. Ordering subcontractor work out of sequence. Some of larger companies, the purchasing department does that, where it's more centralized purchasing as opposed to the builder. Dennis, I know you schedule every single thing and you're personally involved. The buck starts here and stops there in your case. With a larger organization, there's more hands in the pie. And so obviously, sometimes things don't get communicated. They show up and they're there, their crew's there, they're going to go ahead and do it anyway. And again, that starts causing major problems in terms of defects. Keeping the paperwork current at the end of the day, that is huge. I'll tell you a story during the break about that and a lawsuit literally for a house that was supposed to have cost $450,000 that ended up costing $753,000. They'd signed one change order. Paperwork wasn't current. They got to the close. They had never seen a number other than the $450 on their contract. And of course, they were asked to pay $753. Well, the loan didn't match. They didn't have enough cash to make up the difference. Close doesn't happen. The builder says, well, you have to close. You've got 7 days. That's what the contract says. And they said, yeah, but we have 7 days to close on the $450,000. Went to court. Builder lost. Had to make up the difference. Other than the one signed change order, because his policy was all change orders must be signed. We're going to talk about contract documents and how they play into litigation. But because he didn't do what his contract said he was obligated to do, the buyer wasn't obligated. And we know that they made some of those changes. Not all of them, but a significant portion of them. And probably, let's just say, at least $675,000 plus of those changes they made, but they weren't well aware of the impact of the cost and it wasn't communicated well. Back to the communication factor. Interesting, isn't it? Owners that can't make up their mind. Boy, that happens across the board, doesn't it? When you're drawing, does that ever happen, Chantel?
All the time.
All the time. Absolutely. Absolutely. We have those issues. If it's not in writing, and I know we live in a high-tech world, but if there isn't somehow signed off on, and so if you're doing anything electronically, just use an electronic signature. But if it isn't signed off on, it didn't happen, folks. And if you ever go to court, and that's my job, is to keep us out of court. If it ever goes to court, you're going to lose. Because they're going to look at the documents and what was in writing, what was agreed upon. That's step number one. So just keep a record. Make sure, and you can always digitize them and get rid of them later if you're still in the paper world, or if you're a mix of both. Keep copies of both. Look to your attorneys and your accounts to know how long to keep those. I just tell everyone, keep them for at least 10 years. In the state of Utah, the statute of limitations for a defect is 6 years. But then they have, if it's the day before or the hour before the 6 years runs up, they have another 2 years to notify you. That's 8 years. Litigation takes an average of 18 to 24 months. So 10 years minimum is my personal opinion and recommendation. And then you can do what you want with them. There's companies who now digitize everything. So once the house is finished, you can get all your paperwork in one place, digitize it, store it for very little money, and you're done. And then you don't have to pay for storage. I used to have 2 or 3 storage facilities to house all of our stuff. And I recommend just get rid of it and put it digitally. Maybe, Kevin, in this case, you get out there, you've got all your stuff ready, you've scheduled to have 4 guys on the job site, you get there and the house is not ready. You just can't do what you need to do. And if someone like Brad or one of his superintendents says, I don't care, get it done. Do it anyway. If you know it's out of sequence, if you don't want to take responsibility for it, then you better get it in writing that somebody who has authority over you has told you to go ahead and move forward with it. Because if not, your company will get dragged into it as well, because you're supposed to know better. Good advice for those of you who are trade partners. Again, follow-up, communication, and that includes everybody from the top down. You heard me say this before. You're going to hear it all day long today. Pay attention to the details. It's what makes the difference. Okay, codes. Let's go there for a few minutes. Love-hate relationship. Now, before we started this presentation, we were talking to a few of you, and Chantel, you said you knew the codes pretty well. Elaborate.
Somewhat well.
Somewhat well.
Yeah.
How many of you know them really, really well? I've been doing this for a lot of years, and I'm willing to say that I know enough to know that there's a lot that I really don't know. How many code books are there in the ICC family? You ever counted on the back? Let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 code books. I've got 2 up here today. The International Residential Code and the International Building Code. Those are the ones we refer to most often, isn't there? But there's the plumbing code, the electrical code, the fire code, the mechanical code, and on and on and on. One of the things you want to recognize is that there isn't anybody that I've met, and maybe there's somebody out there, and I'd love to meet him someday, that knows all those codes perfectly. But what I have found is that a lot of us know a fair amount, and it's our job to know what we don't know and then hire trade contractors and vendors and partners who are specialists, who understand the codes in their realm, in their world. Tell you a real quick story. It's kind of funny, but years ago, I was building a couple of custom homes at one time, and our building inspector, the city in that particular town, was doing it all. The chief building official was the inspector, the plans checker. He did it all. But the city was getting bigger and growing, so he hired a brand new inspector, right out of college, just finished his code stuff. And he came out on one of my job sites. And he came in, and you could tell he was nervous. And I try to show up there for inspections. That's another class that you can listen to some other time. And how to pass inspections first time, every time, because that's an art. But as I'm there, he runs through and he's doing some stuff. And he writes up and he throws down his pink sheet. Of course, now they're doing it electronically, which is nice. But he writes out the pink sheet. And I think in school, when you become a code official, they teach you to write like doctors, because you can never, can you? Can you ever read what they're saying? And he throws this on the ground, and out the door he goes. So I go and I pick up the paper, and I'm looking at it, and I'm going, okay, they missed that. What is that? Absolutely not. And so I get my tape measure, and I go and measure the head height, and I said, that is fine. And I jump in my vehicle, and I chase him down the road, because I'm mad. And he gets to another house, and he sees me, and he goes running in, and so I block his car so he can't get out. And I fall. You're laughing, Mike, but you probably would like to do this, wouldn't you? So I run into the house, and he's downstairs, and it's a home that's being built by owner. And so he's in the basement. He's going to start in the basement, work his way up. And as I walk down, I just stand on the stairs, bottoms of the stairs, and I'm just looking at him. And they're talking and doing their thing, and he's kind of trying to do his thing and looking at me. And the owner finally turns and says, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm the builder from down the street that just got written up for something that isn't a code violation, and I'm not leaving until he writes you up for the same thing." Oh man, eyes get big, and make a long story short, I left that little meeting, went straight to the city offices, and made a major complaint as I busted through the secretary and into the door of the building official who I'd known for years, and said, "This has got to stop. This is BS." At the end of the day, we sat down around a table, the 3 of us, had a great conversation. All of us said our apologies. And of course, I hadn't violated the code, because he was basing it on the code that went effective January 1. Well, I pulled my permit in October. And so I was building on the old code, and the head height had changed. And I was good, and he thought I wasn't. And make a long story short, we're still good friends to this day. He's now a chief building official and runs a building department in a fairly large city. 3 days later, and this is the point of my story, I'm at the job site at one of the other houses, and he drives up. And I'm thinking, I didn't call for an inspection. What's he doing here? And all of a sudden, he gets out of his car, comes up to me, and he says, "I need your help." And I said, "Well, how can I help you?" He said, "I'm doing a rough plumbing inspection over here, and the plumber is eating me alive. I do not know the plumbing code." Here's a building inspector. And he said, "He's eating me alive." He said, "Is your plumber anywhere around? I know he knows the code better than I do." And I said, "Well, yeah, he just happens to be around on one of the other houses." So we get in my vehicle, we go pick up my plumber, and the 3 of us, as a team of inspectors, if you will, and this probably isn't very kosher, but we go back to the job site, and my plumber becomes the inspector and put the other plumber in his place, and they did what they needed to do, and then we came back, and afterwards he thanked me profusely. "Thank you so much for helping me out in that situation." I learned 2 lessons. One, you got to communicate, and by working through a very tough situation, we have become friends and colleagues over the years. And so there's that adversarial relationship was able to be diminished. That's an important lesson as we work in the industry. Number two, and probably just as important a lesson, is that none of us know the codes really, really well. Even the inspectors don't know them really well. In fact, I'd make the point that usually the things you'll get written up most often on a report is something that they just took a class in, because they're the most familiar with that. And they're human beings just like we are. So if we can work with them and understand and develop relationships, we can get through those challenges a little bit better. But again, the codes can be a love-hate relationship. Which code do you build under? I think we all know that here in this Utah market, it's the ICC. Of course, that's the 2012 version. The books that you're going to see photos of and the ones I have here today, I use electronic on the 2012. These are my older versions, so the 2009 are my hard copies that I've got written up. And as I do litigation matters, because of that statute of limitations, most of what we're doing is in the 2009 codes, not the 2012 codes. So I focus a lot on those. Now, in a couple of years from now, I'll be focusing a lot on the 2012 codes. In fact, we're already starting to have projects that are now going into those. But know the code that you're building under, and it varies around the country. Most municipalities have now adopted the ICC family of codes. And again, there's 14 different code manuals for different things. But the ones we primarily use in the building industry is the building code and the residential code. And of course, the building code is our Bible. And then it refers at times to the residential code, and we'll talk about some things there today. The role of codes, vision. I think it's important that we understand. Sometimes we think the codes are adversarial to us, and specifically those that administer them. We'll talk a little bit, not a lot today about that, but somewhat a little bit later on. But the vision really is to protect the health and safety of those that live in the dwellings. That's really what it's all about. Have you noticed that usually most of the items that they really focus on as they do inspections really is the safety things, which it should be. What's interesting to me is I ask builders all the time, and so I'm going to ask this group, how much would it cost to have an inspector truly inspect your entire home in each one of the phases of inspections and go through everything? Dennis, how long would it take him and how much, or take her? How long? How much time and how much would it cost you for that permit to have them inspect on every inspection, every single thing in your home?
A lot more than we're paying.
A lot more than we're paying. I guesstimate that a 2,000 square foot Rambler, it would take the better part of a day and a half. Can you imagine what that would do? What's the average time, Brad, that an inspector's on the job currently for any given inspection? Now, granted, some inspections, 4 ways, for instance, where they're done. Some cities don't do a 4-way. You know, they'll do the framing, they'll do the electrical, they'll do the plumbing, they'll do the HVAC, all as separate inspectors. Some do it as a single inspection. The code allows for that. We call that a 4-way. So some are longer than others, but the average inspection, how long do they take?
30 minutes.
30 minutes. Yeah, 25 to 30 minutes is what people tell me all the time, including the inspector and the building community, as opposed to a day and a half. Well, add those 6 or 7, up, and you're only talking a couple hours. So let's say 3 hours tops, as opposed to really about 12 hours. They certainly can't see everything, and they're not trying to see everything, and they're certainly not. They can't be a scapegoat for us not doing our job, I guess is a good way to put that. The mission, to provide highest quality codes and products. How many new products do you think came out that, and I'll use the word codifiable. In other words, they have to meet code. They're not in the code book, but they have to meet a certain standard in the codes to be used. How many do you think came out in the year 2013? New products that had to meet a code based? Over 1,200. How many of them do you know about? I can count the ones I know on less than 10 fingers. And so there's a lot of every time a salesman or rep comes to you, Mike, and says, oh, I've got this great new product, you've got to use it. Or Kevin says, yeah. Okay, let's talk about that. And what nuances are there that now Brad has to know and his team have to understand, and the trade partners, as to how that has to go together to truly meet code. Probably 90 to 95% of all the litigation I spend time with, it's due to installation defects where they have not met code. They simply haven't installed it the way it was meant to be installed. And so it's caused problem down the road. And they typically, those who are installing will say, yeah, but I've always done it that way. You know what? My grandkids can't believe that there was a time when I didn't have one of these. That just blows them away because they've grown up with nothing but electronics. And to think that I went to work and had a landline and then went out into the field, and sometimes I think I got more done, spent more time in the office getting things done, but then when I got out into the field, man, I was not disrupted at all. If you wanted me, Brad, you had to get in a car and come find me. And if I was 20, 30 miles away, you'd catch me tonight at 5 o'clock. There just wasn't that much that was urgent. And when it was, you found a way to get a hold of me.